Okay, I should be back now, hopefully. My internet decided to randomly drop, so my bad. But I'm back. If you're here, say hi. If you're not here, I'll see you later. I don't know. All good, but back to the story.
Up. Mary said there was no way she could have survived. She said that the only reason she survives his beatings is because he
Is this where we
leaves
left off
enough
for
of her
you?
intact to rebuild. There's no fixing Liz, and it's all my fault. After the unfortunate death of Liz, I slid further and further into hopelessness. All the days started blending together, and I started fighting the strings less and less. I felt like I was both being dragged around physically by the strings, and mentally, I just gave up fighting. Creole seemed to notice that as he tried to get some kind of reaction out of me, but I gave him no satisfaction at all with anything he tried. That seemed to annoy him at first, but I got that small victory. I might have fully surrendered to the strings if a familiar face hadn't shown up to the shop. When the rusty bell jingled, I didn't bother looking up from my staring contest with a voodoo template on the counter, until the sound of little feet running over to me tore me away from my exhilarating game.
Oh, it's
Little Olivia
Olivia.
stared up at me with her sweet little eyes. "Wow, you look like Mr. King Creole," she said. I'd almost forgotten the girl and her new British mother. I looked at her, and the first smile in a couple of days crossed my face. She returned my smile and looked over to her mother as she came over to me. Her look was one of sorrow, covering her mouth with her hands as she looked at me. "I couldn't stop him," I said, sighing, as I pointed to the strings forcing me to stand. She reached out and held my hands in hers as she offered me some comfort. It felt nice, and it was nice to have someone not immediately hitting me with a wooden cane. As if to further push that train of thought, King Creole emerged from his office, a big wide smile on his face. "Olivia, darling," he said with his big cheery grin, coming over as the little girl ran to him and wrapped her little arms around him. "Don't you worry, dear. I know what day it is today," he said with a soft chuckle, petting her head as he kneeled down to her level. She looked up at him, flabbergasted. "You know today is my birthday?" she asked with a smile. The voodoo owner nodded and stood back up, looking over at me and Olivia's mother, a finger coming up and wagging at the two of us. Olivia's mother quickly let go of my hand and stood back. She feared the creature just as much as I did. He smiled when she was finally away from me and turned his attention back to Olivia. "Of course I do. Now come along, darling. I've got the perfect present for you," Creole said, taking Olivia's hand and leading her to the office. Her mother followed after them, and soon enough left me alone once the office door was closed, leaving me alone once again. Well, at least someone showed me some kindness. It felt nice. The trio emerged from King Creole's office and chuckled as Olivia thanked him a million times for her gift-wrapped present. Smiling down at her and then over at me, his button eyes met mine, and he chuckled. "How about a story before y'all leave for your party?" he asked her, looking down at Olivia, who quickly nodded and jumped up and down, handing the gift to her mother and really just wanting to hear his story. "Travis, my boy, bring that rocking chair and your old stool over here," he ordered me. I nodded and brought the two chairs over. Creole took the stool, and Olivia climbed up onto it. "Now, once upon a time, there was a man named Charlie," he began, a soft chuckle leaving his lips as he looked up at me and Olivia's mother. We both looked away from his commanding gaze. "Now, Charlie loved playing the piano. He wasn't very good at it at first, but he kept practicing and practicing. Day after day, he played the same songs over and over just to get the movements down perfectly. And one day, he did it. He'd mastered the piano."
My boy.
The voodoo man smiled. lifting his fingers up and mimicking like he was playing the piano. "Wow, couldn't he just have wished to be better at the piano?" Olivia asked the storytelling voodoo man. He let out a howling laugh, causing me and Olivia's mother to flinch. "No, darling. My mama always said life can't be solved with a wish. You gotta roll up them sleeves of yours and get it yourself." Charlie knew that, and he never stopped practicing and getting better. He even started his very own band. He smiled, seeing Olivia with stars in her eyes. He continued, "He even fell in love and got engaged. But life isn't always fair to hard-working people like Charlie." He sighed, leaning back in the rocking chair and letting it creak. Now, you and I already know the story. We know who Charles Sumner was and who he became. I knew this very well in my futile attempt to stop my fate from happening, so why was Creole telling an abridged version to Olivia? Especially on her birthday of all days. The brutal murder of Charles Sumner isn't exactly the kind of children's story I'd tell a kid. "What happened to Charlie?" Olivia asked, now concern plastered all over her face as she scooched closer to the edge of the stool to look up at King Creole. The voodoo man's smile grew as he let the chair rock him back closer to Olivia. "Little old Charlie, well, he won a contest. A contest that gave him a lot of money. He was going to buy him and his fiancée a nice plot of land with a house on it. But Charles's little lady friend was very naughty. She wanted that money all for herself," he said, his smile straining his stitched-up mouth as his rocking on the chair continued. "She decided to get her secret boyfriend to steal the money from Charlie so they could keep it all to themselves." At that line, my buttons instinctively drifted over to the basement door. Mary had been punished for her crime for close to 100 years at this point, and it seemed like there would be no end in sight for her. Who was that Greek myth guy? The one whose liver got eaten by that giant bird every day? Prometheus, I think. I guess that's what kind of punishment old King Creole dishes out. So, on the night he won the contest, Charlie was brought to a bar to celebrate and have a party with people he thought were his friends. Then they took him out to the woods. The smile on the pale voodoo store owner's face dropped a bit. Then they started beating him, saying all manner of horrible things to him, he said, shaking his head and looking at Olivia, who was captivated by every word being spoken to her. "Did they kill him?" the little girl asked. Clearly, she was smarter than her years let on. She could tell where the story was going. "Not right away. They beat him, and when they realized Charlie had gotten a very good look at all their faces, well, they picked up some sticks, and they stabbed them into Charlie's eyes. You cannot imagine the pain Charlie felt, his so-called friends hurting him this badly," Creole said, taking his top hat off and running his gloved hands through his messy black hair. "Only the problem was, that didn't kill Charlie. Oh, he screamed and screamed. Anyone would if that happened to them. The people hurting him, well, they panicked. What if someone heard that and they'd come?" Creole quickly put his hat on and sat up straight as he looked at Olivia. "Did someone come to save Charlie?" the little girl asked, hugging the doll of her old mother that never left her side. I was also on the edge of my seat. Even though I knew the outcome, what can I say? He's a good storyteller. "No. Nobody did. But they were so scared that they'd be seen and caught that they had to act fast. One of them grabbed a rusty saw from the back of one of them trucks. The others held Charlie down, shoving his face into the cold, wet dirt. And then they
Sus.
started cutting. Only there was a problem. The saw was duller than they were, and I didn't cut well at all. He said, and that made sense. The cut to my neck that Creole gave me is nice and smooth. He did it with a nice sharp saw. His own cut, though, it's jagged and uneven in places, like someone really forced it to be cut. How long did it take to end? Olivia whimpered.
This is a child
Her
he's
mother
telling the
came
story
over
to.
hug
What the
her from
frick?
behind to calm her down. The little girl burying her face in her mother's dress, but still looking over at Creole, obviously still fascinated by the story. Oh, it took a very long time, darling, Creole said. 30 minutes from when the saw started cutting to when Charlie's head fell off his shoulders. They covered his body under some leaves and sticks, and they left him there, he said, holding his hands up as if that was the end. But he continued, another smile spreading across his face. But they did not account for his mama. I raised a brow at this. Creole never talked about his mother. It was something that sent him into a fury whenever me, and especially Mary, brought it up. But here he was, telling a little girl all about his elusive mother. Me and Olivia's mother were obviously curious. Now, Charlie's mama was very skilled in the arts of voodoo. She was loved by everyone for healing the sick and helping the needy. And when she learned that her son was missing, oh, now she sprung into action. She found Charlie's body within a few days of him going missing. But she didn't report it to no police. Oh, no, no. He tisked, wagging his finger at all three of us. She took him straight back home, and she fixed him right up, bringing him back to the land of the living. Olivia gasped and started clapping in excitement, looking up at her mother like it was a miracle. Now, Charlie was very upset at what happened to him. He worked so hard all his life, and he'd been taken advantage of. Well, he decided that it was his turn to have the fun. He chuckled, looking up at me with a smile. He made everyone who killed him suffer. Especially his fiancée and her secret boyfriend. He hummed with a smile. If he'd done something this horrible to Mary, I can only imagine what he did to Henry, her secret mob boyfriend. Wow. What did Charlie do when he was done? Olivia asked, setting her doll on her lap and looking up at him for an answer. He smiled down at her and tousled her hair. Why, he decided to teach everyone the same lesson he learned. Taking the easy way only gets you punished, he said with a chuckle, looking over at me and Olivia's mother. Your new mama learned that the hard way. Your new mama left her family and moved to America to start a new life just for herself. Now, she's the best mother you ever could have asked for. He smiled, Olivia nodding back quickly and turning to hug her mother nice and tight. She looked over at me and nodded sadly. But what about him? What did he do? She asked,
Yikes.
pointing at me,
Yikes.
and then looking at Creole.
Yikes.
I also looked at him, expecting some bullshit thing I'd done to deserve this.
Right.
What he said made me want to pull out the switchblade I've been hiding this whole time and just stab his heart out. I was feeling selfish, he replied, standing up and walking past me as the strings tightened and forced me to stand in place while he said his goodbyes to Olivia and her mother. Both of them left the shop, and he approached me and wrapped his arm around my stiff body.
Travis, my boy, your parents called me once again. They're begging me to help them find you. I think they might even be coming over again. Who knows? If they ask for a wish, I just might grant it.
He chuckled, grabbing my face and pulling it over to look at him. He smiled wide as he squished my cheeks. You wouldn't dare. I choked out, managing to fight off the string's influence enough to say that. That got a hard laugh out of him. He smacked me across my face and caused me to go limp against my will. He put his dress shoe on my face and put down pressure on it.
I wouldn't dare,
he asked, after laughing at me for a good while, putting even more pressure on my head.
If you weren't my sweet little pet, I would have already gutted you like a fish and used you for a voodoo doll.
He hummed, reaching down and grabbing me by my hair and pulling me back up.
Listen here, if you so much as try anything with Mary, I'll kill your parents right in front of you.
Wow.
He said with a smile, dropping me back on the floor and fixing his tie. I struggled to push myself up and look at him, gritting my teeth and trying to think of a way to fight back. And what I said is the reason I haven't posted an update in a while. You know, your mother would be so disappointed that this is what you're doing, I said, and I instantly regretted it when he stopped in place and looked back at me, his teeth grinding hard as he came over to me, grabbing his cane from seemingly nowhere and starting to beat me with it. That was normal when he got pissed off, but this time he dragged me by the suit collar down into the basement.
You will not speak of my mother,
he growled as he tossed me down to the floor of the basement and snapped his fingers. The strings on my body pulled tight as he had me suspended from the floor.
I guess I'll have to make sure that filthy mouth of yours is kept shut.
Oh no.
He smiled as he produced a needle and thread.
Oh
He
no.
stabbed my lips with it, and he sewed my mouth shut.
Oh no.
He left me dangling from the ceiling for 2 straight days.
Oh no.
Mary managed to cut the threads on my mouth with the porcelain shards that she always had near her. After he calmed down, he dragged me back up to the counter and shoved me behind it, pointing a gloved finger at my face. The voodoo human doll delivered a threat to me that has left me chilled to the bone.
You so much as speak out of line, and I will turn your parents into dolls, and I will burn them in front of you,
Jesus.
he said, stepping away from me and letting his threats seep in. He means it, and he has the ability to do it. I need to stop him. I need to kill him. Let me get this straight, and for the record, I don't know how to do any kind of voodoo. It's not like King Creole has a how-to-do voodoo book lying around here somewhere. And let's just say the internet has been even less helpful. Anything I try just ends up with me getting beat by my beloved boss when he discovered what I'd tried to do. So that's completely off the table for me. Though it would have been cool to give him the same shit he's been giving me. So far, the only thing I had going for me was the switchblade and Mary. The old porcelain girl still might have some fight in her. Plus, I still have the key to the basement that my little template voodoo friend gave me. Creole seemingly hasn't noticed, or he has an infinite amount of keys because he easily goes down there every day to beat Mary and to do his usual messed up shit down there. So when he went down there today, I expected to hear the usual shattering porcelain sounds. But I didn't hear it this time. I heard a piano. Now let me tell you something. Hearing any kind of music break the deafening silence of the shop was like hearing the voice of an angel. I turned back to look at the basement door and raised a brow as to where the hell a piano had come from. I've been down there a lot. There ain't no piano down there. I walked over to the basement door and found it open. Now, this was very strange. Well, he hadn't told me not to come down there, so I silently walked down the steps. The sounds of a sweet yet sad tune played and grew louder the closer I came towards the basement. I stopped just short of the final step and pressed myself up against the stone wall, peeking my head over to see what was happening down here. And my jaw hit the floor faster than an anvil from the sky. The basement looked completely different. No hanging bodies, no bones, no rotting corpses. Nothing. Instead, it was a concert hall. Like a full-on giant concert hall. Seats with cushions with people sitting in them and watching. Now, not real people, obviously. Each one of them had a stitched-up mouth and button eyes. Most likely, he made an audience out of the bodies down here. I looked over
Creepy.
to the stage, and my button eyes nearly fell off, because playing the piano wasn't King Creole. It was Charles Sumner. Well-combed hair, tan, normal eyes, and a big smile on his face as he played the piano. My confusion was immense, but he played the piano so beautifully. It was almost hypnotizing. I looked around for a place to sit, and I found one next to one of the guys who had once wished for $1 million and ended up getting hit by a car right after. He said nothing as I sat down. I kept staring at the stage, my button eyes soaking in the scenery of something that had only happened in the 1920s
it
when
escalates
Charles
a
was
lot.
still alive. I can see all that practice really paid off for him. It would have been a lovely concert, maybe one for the history books, until Mary descended from the ceiling to the stage with wires attached to her. Unlike Charles, who was all smiles and soaking up the opportunity, Mary looked sad and almost unwanted in a way. And yet she, too,
Oop.
was human again.
I messed
The
up.
very definition of beauty. She had golden blonde hair, pale skin, and wore a white dress. When she landed on the stage, she took a step forward and
Transport
looked
back in
at
time,
Charles.
maybe.
He ignored her, but kept playing his heart out. Mary sighed and looked out to the crowd. "I'm not gonna do this again, Charles. I hate it," she said finally, causing Charles to miss the stroke of the key and then snap his attention over to her.
You like the
Standing up,
scarecrow hat?
I felt my blood run cold as he pushed away from the piano and started to walk over to her. I reached down to my shoe and removed the switchblade. Yes, I've been hiding it in my shoe the whole time. It's what he gets for giving me way too big of shoes. "Listen, you whore," Charles snarled from the stage. His anger was obvious. He walked over to Mary and grabbed her by the throat, the woman gasping and starting to hit him on his chest. "You know what today is, and you damn well better sing. Or I will make sure this eternal punishment of yours becomes much worse," he said. "Good. At least I'll finally be free of you," she choked out, raising another hand to strike him, only for him to intercept it and toss her to the ground. The woman coughed and hacked, soon an entire chunk of her face falling into her hands. Her skin began cracking all over the place, and soon enough, she was back to her porcelain form. "Very well, then. Oh, Travis," Charles suddenly asked, spinning on his heels and looking at me. I froze and quickly shoved the knife into my pocket, looking around and seeing that every person in the crowd was looking at me. "Come on over here, boy. I require your services." He chuckled, walking back over to the piano. Sitting down with some dramatic flair, he began playing some practice notes. Those notes sent my strings trembling, and I was soon forced to stand up and walk over to the stage. My buttons looked at Mary as I passed her and took her place on the stage. I looked then over at Charles, who waved back at me and started up the music again. The second he did, the strings pulled tighter than ever and began
Don't look at me.
to dance. Now, normally I can't dance. I look like a thrashing fish more than anything. But the strings forced me to dance as elegantly as any professional dancer. This wouldn't be too much of a problem, except for the fact that every motion the strings made caused me more pain than I can even begin to try to explain to you. Each and every pull of those strings felt as if each limb was being pulled out of their socket, along with my skin being pulled off with a potato peeler. I screamed with each and every pull of the string, each and every dance move, each and every tone of Charles's piano keys was like another peel of my skin. Mary watched in horror as I screamed and begged for her help. She looked between me and Charles before she finally stood up. "Stop. Enough. I'll sing," she finally said, causing Charles to stop and turn to her. By extension, this allowed me to stop as well. I collapsed to the floor, crying and whimpering at just how much pain I was in.
That's so jacked
Mary
up, bro.
walked over to me and carefully put her hand on mine, flinching away when I hissed out in pain.
"You better start before I force him to do it again,"
Charles threatened, his fingers hovering over the keys and ready to force me up once again. The woman waved him off, helping me sit up first before she backed up. Looking out at the crowd, Mary sighed and then took a deep breath. And then she started to sing, not like lyrics, but like an opera singer might. It was incredible, just like Charles's piano playing. The two of them went together in perfect harmony. Charles started to play it again while Mary sang her heart out. I just watched from the stage, completely enraptured as my aching body began to heal from my abuse. It was something that you can only really experience if you were there. It was as if Beethoven and Mozart cooperated
You got this,
together
Mary.
to create something made of pure beauty. It was heavenly. To think a monster like him could produce something so beautiful. Softly, Mary finished, and with a flurry of keystrokes, Charles finished. He stood from the piano, stepped away from it, and bowed to the crowd. The corpses stood up and clapped.
"Happy birthday, Mama,"
Oh,
he said to the ceiling, lowering his head, and in a short breath, the stage was gone. I don't know how he did it. I can't even blink, and yet in the blink of an eye, the basement was back to its normal, horrible self. Creole was back, putting his top hat on his head and sighing out from his nose.
"I hope she's burning in hell as you'll be."
Mary spat,
that was
causing
stupid.
Creole to swiftly turn around.
Why
and
would she
dick
say
smack
that?
her, sending shards of porcelain to the floor.
Like, why
and
would she
causing
say
Mary
that?
to fall
Stupid.
back
It's
into
like
the
she wanted to
wall
get
and fall
slapped.
to the floor.
Like,
Creole
seriously.
then turned to me and smiled.
"As if she wouldn't be joining me."
He chuckled, walking past me and toward the stairs, his steps heading up most likely back to his office. I went over to Mary and I helped her back up, handing her some pieces of herself, which she thanked me for. "I'm guessing he does that every year, huh?" I asked her, sitting down next to the porcelain woman. She nodded. "His tribute to her, for bringing him back to life, and for being a good mother, I guess," she explained, looking over at me with her only eye and sighing, shaking her head and looking over to all the bones and bodies lying about. "I'm no better than him. I eat anything he sends down here just to be able to grow back any piece of my body. If I really wanted him to kill me, I would just have to stop eating. And yet here I am." she said with a sorrowful chuckle, looking over to me and reaching a hand out to touch my face, sending me flinching a bit, but she softly rubbed my red-painted cheeks. "Those look good on you. Some much-needed color." "I'd rather have some real color," I chuckled, letting her touch me for a second before pulling away.
Bro,
I don't know
I
if
know.
it's because she's my only contact in this horrible place, but it's comforting to know that she cares about me.
All right,
At
so we
least
said more
enough to stop my
pumpkins,
suffering when she can. Our
maybe more hay
moment was
bales.
interrupted by a hard crack to the back of my head, sending
Oh.
me falling into her lap. As I looked up, I saw Creole snarling down at the both of us.
You trying to steal my pet, whore?
Ooh,
He asked,
I'm gonna add one more
raising his
patch right
cane
here.
and striking her harder, growling as he struck her hard enough to shatter a good portion of her face.
Jeez.
I looked over once I regained myself. I saw what he'd done to her, and I acted. I pulled the switchblade out of my pocket.
Oh my
and
God,
brought the
you've been so
blade
excited
up
about this
and grabbed
goddamn
King Creole by the shoulder. Turning him
switchblade.
around, he looked at me in absolute confusion and fury as I slashed at his throat with the blade. I managed to cut almost the entirety of his front stitches, causing a big spray of black liquid to come flying out of his throat and causing him to stumble
Give me this
forward
darker
and onto the
color.
floor, clutching his throat as he did so.
You
Why
idiot.
isn't it drawing on
What
me?
have you done?
He choked out, staring up at me with the rage of a
Oh,
cornered
it's on the
animal.
wrong one.
Acting on
Stupid.
impulse, I kicked him in the head, and I broke more stitches, causing more of the liquid to ooze out of him, and causing him to fall flat on his face as he bled out. I backed up and dropped the knife. Looking over at Mary, she was putting her face back together and staring at awe at what I'd done. That didn't last too long, though, as the voodoo man pushed himself back up, his head dangling down by his shoulder and chuckling up at me. He stood up and fixed his head back easily, pulling out his threads and needle and leaving the items to stitch up his neck. I backed up from him, quickly reaching down and grabbing the knife again.
You really risked the lives of your family for a whore like her?
He asked with a giggle, clearly pissed off royally and trying to hide behind a forced smile. When the floated thread and needle were
Alright.
finished, they dropped themselves into his hand, and he carefully put them in his pocket. He reached down to the floor, dusted off his hat, and placed it on his head with a smile. His smile widened, and then he lunged at me and shoved me into the wall with the force of an 18-wheeler. I tried stabbing him again, but he simply took the stab through his hand and looked at me. "Why aren't you dead?" I asked as I kicked my legs at him. He answered with a chuckle and a pat to the cheek.
It takes more than that to undo my mama's work.
He answered, looking back over at Mary to make sure she wasn't doing anything to try and save me this time. Then, looking back at me and looking at the knife embedded in his hand, he tisked at me.
It looks like I'm paying your parents a visit.
"Don't you dare, you psycho," I said, desperately trying to get out of his death grip. But he just watched and laughed like an animal playing with its food. He had the upper hand on me, and I'd lost my only advantage against him. He tossed me to the floor and stomped on my head with his dress shoes as he looked down at me.
I will do you one better, Travis. How about I bring them here? Show them that you're alive and well. And then have you kill them for me.
He said with a giggle, grinding his heel into my skull and causing me to thrash and try to fight him off. But I felt the pull of the strings, and my angry growls and curses turned into a big smile. "That sounds perfect, sir. I'll get the tools ready for you," I happily said as he lifted his foot off of me and let me stand back up. He smiled as he looked at me and nodded.
Why, that sounds excellent, Travis. Why, I bet they'll be so happy to see you. Just imagine
This hat
the
looks
looks
so
on their
old because there's so
faces
many patches
as
on
you
there.
slice off their skin and help me turn them into dolls.
He said with another giggle. I wanted to wrap my hands around his neck and crush it with the force of a vice, but all I could do was nod and salute him. I can't wait, sir, I declared. He nodded and tousled my
Bro,
combed hair,
jeez, that's what I'm saying,
turning
bro.
and starting to walk upstairs before he suddenly stopped and turned to look at me.
Travis, be a good boy.
Be
and
a
bring
good
Nessa his
boy.
cane, he said
Patchy,
with a
fine.
hum.
I
Panda.
turned my head to
Patchy
look
the
at the
panda.
item sitting on the floor, turning back to him,
Alice, that's
and
such a good
finally walking to get the item.
idea.
I picked it up
It is
and
Patchy the
handed it back to him.
panda. So I need to
Good
add a
boy.
patch strap
He said,
over here
walking upstairs
for his
and
eye.
leaving me, the knife still stabbed in
Yeah,
his
you're
hand.
right, Alice.
Well, I messed up. I wasted my only chance to kill him, and now he'll be back with my parents at any moment, and it's all my fault. I should have fully decapitated him. Maybe that would have worked. I don't know anymore. I've been laying on the floor of the shop for about 5 minutes now, just crying. Well, I was, because I think I have one more chance. My little voodoo template friend has just produced a scissor blade for me. I'm sorry I ever said anything bad about you, little guy. It looks like I have a chance. I'll save you, Mom and Dad. I promise. King Creole took his sweet time bringing my parents over, and that worked in my favor. With the help of my little template friend, I got a scissor blade. What better weapon could I ask for? With renewed vigor, I acted quickly and headed downstairs to get Mary. She was my only real ally in this fight, so her help would be important. Although, let's just say she was more than a little skeptical. That is the worst plan I have ever heard of, she said, her face pressed against her hand as she shook it. Well, she didn't have much confidence in me. But at the same time, I didn't hear her coming up with any ideas. Even if I agree to help you, you're going to be under his control. How are you going to go against that? She asked me, a quizzical look plastered on her cracked face. Well, that's where you come in. You got to ambush him from behind and split his attention. I know for a fact he loses control when he stops focusing. I pointed out to her, handing her half a scissor. She looked down at the item, like it was an armed grenade, looking up to me. Where the hell'd you get this? She asked, admiring the surprisingly sharp item. She dragged her porcelain finger across it. That template doll that sits on my counter, I said quickly, looking back up to the stairs and then to her. Look, it's not important right now. I'll leave the basement door unlocked, and when you see Creole get close enough to the door, just ambush him. It'll get me enough time to be out of his control and help you. Please, Mary. I don't want him to hurt my parents. I begged her, grabbing her hands and squeezing them against mine. She was trembling as she looked down at the item, and then up to me. All right. Yes. Okay, I'll do it.
Alright,
She
so
nodded,
if
looking around the basement
Patchy
and
the
walking
panda,
off in a
his
direction,
left
producing
eye,
a scarf and pulling it tight against her
left
hands.
eye,
I'll wrap this around
this
his neck,
eye.
and I'll fight against him as best I can, she said softly, coming over to me and handing me back the scissor. But you need to cut his head off completely this time. No half-assing it, she said, poking her finger into my chest. I nodded and wrapped my arms around her and pulled her into my chest, thanking her softly before quickly going upstairs
Thanking
to
her
arrange anything else
softly.
that might
Hello?
help us in our battle against the Voodoo King.
Oof,
My
what's up
little
again?
friend wasn't much of a help, but he'd done more than enough for me. I walked into the office and quickly looked around the boss man's place. I looked at the only picture he cared about, Charles and his mama. I took it and shoved it into my suit. Quickly, I made my way back to the counter and sat in agonizing silence as I waited for him to show up. It was maybe an hour or two later that he strolled right into the shop with my mother and father in tow. I hadn't seen my parents in who knew how long, and when they saw me standing at the counter, my mother screamed and quickly fainted in my dad's arms.
Dang.
Mom always was kind of squeamish. "What did you do to our son?" my dad shouted, obviously having mixed up feelings about his only kid looking the way I did. Creole simply chuckled and drummed his fingers on his cane. His button eyes turned over to look at me with a more than satisfied smirk.
"Travis, my boy, you just gonna stand there? Come greet your mama and daddy,"
he ordered, snapping his fingers. The old familiar pull of the strings forced me over to my parents. At the very least, he let me talk. "Dad," I managed to choke out through pent-up tears. I wanted to reach my arms out and hug him tight. My mom started coming around again, and she looked at me, reaching a shaking hand out. I may have been an undead puppet, but I was still their son. "Travis," my mother whimpered, touching my painted cheeks and my combed hair.
"Aw, now as much as I'd hate to break up the sweet family reunion,"
Creole interrupted, walking over to us and smiling as he rubbed the head of his cane with his gloved hands,
"Travis here has been a very bad boy.
Guys,
And
this picture's coming out,
I do
man.
believe a punishment is in order."
he
Picture's
hissed,
coming out.
raising his cane and snapping his finger again. My body went as stiff as a board, and a smile was forced upon my face as I took the offered cane and raised it above my head. I brought it down on my mother's head.
Oh my
With a
god.
sickening crack, she went down. I was screaming internally as my dad looked at what I'd done. I wish I could have told him the reason I'd done it, that
Oh
I
my
wasn't in
gosh.
control, but I just as quickly raised the cane again, and I brought it down on his head as well.
"Good boy."
Creole hummed, wrapping his arm around
Yo,
me
this
and
is
pulling
sad,
me close.
bro.
He smiled and pinched my cheek playfully as he took back the cane.
"Be a dear and start taking them to the basement."
Oh
He
my
said,
gosh.
walking over to the basement
That's
door
jacked
to unlock
up.
it.
He made him kill his parents.
And that's when Mary burst through the door and tackled him. He barely had time to react before Mary was on top of him and wrapping the scarf around his neck and pulling it tight. As I'd predicted, his control over me faded, and I quickly pulled the scissor blade out. As Mary fought with him, I ran over and plunged the blade into his mouth. "What are you doing?" Mary shouted, still trying to contain him to the floor as I jostled for space next to her. I didn't have time to answer her, so instead, I showed her, dragging the scissor across his stitched-up mouth and cutting free all of them. His jaw dropped open soon enough, and that black sludge began to leak out of his mouth. Next, I started putting the blade against his throat and slicing as many stitches as I could.
Oh no.
But, inevitably, he threw us off and stumbled to his feet, barely able to stand on his own.
"Oh, you've done it now,"
Oh my
He
gosh.
snarled, spitting out black sludge as he stumbled forward to us. He covered his mouth to keep the fluid inside of him and kept his other hand on the cane to keep himself up. It was clear to me now that the black sludge was somehow keeping his rotting corpse alive. So, getting it out of him was the key to beating him. "Now, Charles," I said through pants, reaching into my suit and pulling out the picture of his mother. "Didn't your mama ever teach you not to swear?" I asked, removing the picture from the frame
Oof.
and stabbing the blade through it.
Oh no.
If I pissed him off before, well, I really pissed him off with that stunt. He seemingly got a second wind, and he pounced on me, tackling me to the floor and beating
Alright,
me
I
with
think
his
that'll be
fist
good
and
for
his
his
cane
patch.
when he felt like it. He might very well have killed me
I don't
if
know.
Mary hadn't stabbed him in the button eye with one of her
Maybe
shards.
here.
He screamed
It needs to
something
come from his
fierce,
eye.
and he fell off of me, His left button eye cracked in two and fell off to the floor. He looked up at her with his single remaining button and forced himself to stand back up.
"You gonna kill me again?"
he asked her, reaching out for his cane and using it to push himself up.
See?
Obviously,
Yeah.
his strength was waning as the floor was starting to be coated in his black sludge. "No, Charles. I'm finally gonna end this," she said, helping me back up and handing me the scarf to clean my bleeding face. I struggled to stand as well, but I finally managed and brandished my blade out like it was a knife. The
Okay,
voodoo
yeah, that
King
works.
Creole was finally about to be bested, except for the fact that we were in his shop where he had all the power.
"It won't be that easy,"
he chuckled, which turned into a coughing fit as he covered his mouth again. I was ready for anything until I noticed the wall of voodoo dolls was empty.
Oh,
I swallowed a
yikes.
lump in my throat as I pointed it out to Mary. We both collectively looked around, and then up to the ceiling,
All right,
where
so then
dozens
another
of
pumpkin
button eyes
and
stared down
another.
at us. I forgot about those,
Oh,
I said, having forgotten all about Creole's bodyguards. They
can
fell
do
on
another
us
bale
like
of
a pile
hay
of rats,
on the other
each of
side.
them stabbing us with needles or razor
Oh
blades,
no.
or even little claws that they had built in. Mary had an easier time with it. She was made of porcelain, so it was much harder to actually hurt her. Me, on the other hand, I was getting torn to shit. They slid down my strings and just had a blast slicing me and stabbing me. Creole, meanwhile, struggled his way towards his office, most likely to sew up the damage to himself, when the front door opened and I heard a familiar voice.
Olivia?
"Don't listen to him anymore."
Oh, it's
Olivia's
Olivia.
mother said,
Yes.
her face twisted in fear and determination. All the voodoo dolls suddenly stopped and looked over to one that used to be among their ranks. Creole stared at her like he'd kill her if she said another word, but it didn't stop her. "He has to hurt all of us and caused you to forget who you used to be. You were all people once, lied to, and betrayed by him. He's the enemy." She pointed to the limping Creole, who looked around as all of the dolls turned their head to him.
Uh-oh.
"Y'all got what was coming to you. You asked for something, and I gave it to you,"
he declared. The voodoo dolls weren't persuaded, however. They all looked at each other, and then they leaped from me and Mary onto Creole. He cursed something fierce as they swarmed him and tackled him to the ground. It was like ants swarming dropped food. "Thank you," I said to Olivia's mother. She waved it off and quickly took the scissors from me and reached up to cut off my strings, only for me to stop her and point to my unconscious parents. "Help them first, please," I said quickly. She looked at me with hesitation, but quickly nodded, kneeling and pulling each of them out of the shop.
Nice.
"Was that part of your brilliant plan?" Mary asked after a moment. I looked over to her, and I chuckled, rubbing my combed hair and messing it up some, sighing happily at being able to do that. "Of course it was. I'm a master strategist," I declared. Although our joking was short-lived when Creole's hand burst through the pile of voodoo
no,
dolls and emerged from them, his button back and his stitches fixed. Guess having dolls made out of all the
another
items he needed
pumpkin
to fix himself up with to attack him wasn't the best idea.
and another bale of hay?
He was like a cockroach.
I don't know.
"Everyone's betraying me today,"
Oof.
He snarled, fixing his tie and storming over to us. Me and Mary backed up and pointed our makeshift weapons at him. I peeked over him to see all the voodoo dolls lifeless on the floor. They'd fought the good fight. I backed up and my foot hit something on the floor. Looking down, a beautiful sight met my eyes.
Olivia?
My dad's Zippo lighter. It must
Uh-oh.
have fallen out of his pocket when Olivia's mother had dragged him outside. Thank you for being a smoker, Dad. I reached down and lifted up the item, flicking it to life and tossing the burning flame over to the pile of voodoo dolls. And those babies must have been made of gasoline because they went up quicker than a forest fire.
No,
Creole screeched, staring back at me in horror as the fire began to spread further across the shop.
you idiot. Have you any idea of what you've done?
No,
He
I don't
shouted at
actually.
me, staring back at the
What did I
growing
do?
inferno. The smoke from the voodoo dolls began to rise, but then the smoke seemingly turned at a 90-degree angle and headed down towards the basement. At the time, I had no idea what had just happened. Now, with hindsight, it was pretty clear. That smoke was the souls trapped in the voodoo dolls, and they were heading down to their bodies.
Looks like your time on Earth is finally up, Charles,
Mary declared. Creole turned to her and grabbed her by the hair, pulling her out of my reach and forcing me to stay stiff against the front door as he backed up away from me.
Oh, don't you think you ain't coming with me, whore?
He snarled. I watched in horror as shambling, rotting corpses started rising up from the darkness
What's
of the
up, son?
basement. Some had no
How you
flesh to
doing?
speak of, and were just bones shambling for their revenge. Creole looked back and shoved Mary into their awaiting clutches. She was grabbed and began to be torn apart. I guess for eating their corpses, maybe. "Mary!" I shouted, horrified that my only friend was being killed right before my eyes. But she looked back with not an ounce of fear in her eyes. Instead, she smiled and nodded towards me. I think it was her way of thanking me for being with her, for being her friend, and helping her escape the hellish torture. She waved goodbye to me, and then she was shattered into a million little pieces, all of them shining and dropping to the floor.
This ain't over, Travis. I will make sure you suffer for all of this,
Creole yelled as his shop was engulfed in fire and the rotting corpses of his victims came closer and closer to him. He shoved his finger towards me and said,
You don't get out of this that easily.
Uh-oh.
and
None
then
of
he
this
was
has been
grabbed
easy.
from behind and dragged back towards the basement door. He kicked and screamed, his stitched-up mouth breaking open once more and his sharp yellow teeth snapping at anything.
This isn't over,
He said one last time as the creatures pulled him down into the basement and the fire engulfed the door. And then the strings went slack and I fell to the ground. I looked at them and then my hands shook as they seemingly disappeared into thin air.
Oh, snap. We
I
used to be
was
free
free.
now.
But I didn't have time to waste. The fire was spreading fast, and I needed to get out of there before I became one with the shop permanently. But there was one thing I knew I could save. Braving the roaring fire, I walked over to the counter and saw that my little template friend was still sitting there. I reached out and grabbed him. Shoving him into my pocket, I quickly rushed out of the shop as the fires reached the ceiling. I exited and came upon Olivia's mother tending to my parents. "He's gone. So is Mary," I said sadly, looking to the floor and starting to cry. She reached out and wrapped her loving arms around me, hugging me tight as I let out all my pent-up emotions. I may have been free from him, but I wasn't back to normal. I
Yeah.
still had button eyes, pale skin, stitches across my neck, and those stupid rosy cheeks. Guess I would have expected that to change back to normal, but I guess not. "Alexandra," the woman said after a period of letting me cry. I looked at her confused, and she gave a loving smile to me. My name, so you can stop calling me Olivia's mother, she chuckled, tussling my hair and getting a sad but genuine chuckle out of me. I guess I never did ask her own name, huh? Alexandra helped me take my parents to our house, just as the fire department showed up to fight the fire. Let's just say the police were livid when they saw the burning voodoo establishment. Turns out, as told to me by Alexandra, that the police force made a deal with Creole decades ago. He keeps crime low for them, and they don't investigate when anyone goes missing. A beautiful partnership. It also explains why no one ever investigated us, and why that rookie did. No one told him to not mess around with King Creole. Arriving home with my parents, Alexandra assured me that their wounds were not serious and that they'd recover. That left me plenty of time to think about how to change myself back to normal. Don't get me wrong, immortality sounds great and all, but if it means once again being cooped up in my room for my entire life, well, I'd rather at least try to find a way to change back. I also had to find a way to tell my parents the entire story of what happened. It was a little awkward for them to see me like this at first, and I know they still try to avoid eye contact with me, but they still love me, and they're so happy to have me back in the house with them. They offered to help me in my search to reverse this, but they've been through so much already that I decided to go it alone. Well, with the help of Alexandra and Olivia, of course. And the template. He's no normal voodoo doll. For once, he can communicate with me. Well, kinda. He leaves me little notes from time to time, giving me advice and updates. More often than not, it's that he loves me.
Aww.
Cute little guy is thankful I saved him. For now, I've been
Aww.
trying to get into contact with anyone who knows anything about voodoo and curses. Not much success, just your usual nuts. But I'm giving it my all to try and find a way to fix myself, now more than ever. I've been able to finally fall asleep and enjoy a good night's rest for the first time in who knows how long. But this one night, I had a dream, a nightmare, really. I was back in the shop, the burnt-out remains of the shop, and the only thing intact was the basement door. Reaching out to open it, I
What should this
entered it
pumpkin
and
face
walked
be?
down the winding path. And then I saw him, sitting in a chair, waiting for me. He looked up at me with a big smile, a cup of wine in his hand, as he looked up at me. My body froze as he set the cup next to him and stood up, walking over to me and giving me a wide smile.
I told you, Travis. It ain't over.
Oh, heck
I
no.
woke up in a cold sweat, panting hard and looking around my room. I looked over to the voodoo template on my nightstand, and he pointed to the window. I staggered over to it and looked out. In the darkness, one normally couldn't see what was standing out there, but with my button eyes, I saw him standing underneath the street lamp.
Oh
He
no.
tipped his top hat to me, and
Oh,
when the street
no.
light flickered back on, he'd disappeared.
Oh no. Oh no, no, no. Well, there's that.
Hey,
Yeah. So there's the tale. Now I guess we can just listen to swing music while I finish, because I don't want to start another adventure and I'm almost done. Now we're just kind of filling stuff in. Let's do that.
Let's play a game.
Hey, hey. Let's play a game. Almost done drawing, everybody. Thanks for hanging out with me. I can't believe it's almost 7 o'clock. Sheesh! I got an hour break before the Bamboo Bay crew. I did this to myself. Oh well. I actually meant to stream a lot more today than what I've done. But I'm actually pretty proud of this. Obviously it's not perfect, but it's mine! Yeah, I just realized after Alice said it that that panda is Patchy the Panda, and I didn't even realize what I was drawing until I drew it. I was like, oh, that's definitely Patchy the Panda. Alright, so let's see if I can... Nope, that doesn't work. Well... Get this color back. Maybe it's this one. There we go. I'm just zoom in. Wait.
When cryptos creak and tombstones quake, spoons come out for a swinging wake. Happy hearts materialize and begin to vocalize. Grim grinning ghosts come out to socialize. Close your eyes and don't try.
It's creepy music.
Shrouded in a dark disguise. Grim grinning ghosts come out to socialize. When cryptos creak and tombstones quake, spoons come out for a swinging wake. Happy haunts materialize and begin to vocalize. Grim grinning ghosts come out to socialize.
Dum. Alright, looks like we're pretty much making progress. Pretty much good to go. Alright, so there's a second pumpkin. I feel like I need to make his eyes darker just because the mouth is so dark. Uh-oh.
When cryptos creak and tombstones quake, spooks come out for a swinging wake. Happy haunts materialize and begin to vocalize. Grim grinning ghosts come out to socialize.
Yeah. How are we doing? I think one more bale, like not bale, well, this is a haystack. So one more bale of hay, like right here. And then I think I'm done. Yeah. Hey, hey, hey. Womp, 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 womp. Alright, so I want it to be about this big. Come to about here. About here. Well, this is gonna take a minute. Maybe zoom in. Let's go. Bounce. Hey, hey. Well, this is going to go longer than anticipated. Forgot that I'm literally drawing every single strand.
Ghostbusters!
The Ghostbusters, nice. Who are you gonna call? Ghostbusters. Who are you gonna call? Ghostbusters. Let's go. I ain't afraid of no ghosts. Man, I just thought of a really cool idea after I just did all that. Maybe I could put it here. Should put a sign that says treats only, please. Or I could put it in the hay bale. Like, stick it in there and just write it there. Yeah. I'll do that. Who you gonna call? Ghostbusters. Let's go. Ghostbusters. I ain't afraid of no ghosts. I ain't afraid of no ghosts. Hey. Hey. I ain't afraid of no ghosts. After this song, I guess we can do. Oh, we can't. Let's see. Probably can. Let's see. Guess we can listen to one more story. It's just gonna take longer than I thought it would. Ghostbusters.
Ever since my wife Adeline disappeared, it's been just me and Charlie all alone. I don't mind it. I've never cared much for company. If I'd wanted visitors, I wouldn't have tried to get as far away from civilization as I could, now would I? Charlie's pit stops back at the house for food, sleep, and to deposit the presents he sometimes brings back
Yikes.
are enough for me.
Yikes.
In the meanwhile, I occupy my time with books and occasionally television. Adeline left behind more than her fair share of the former. She had a thing for mystery novels. I never used to take any interest in them, but nowadays, well, I suppose reading the ones I knew she enjoyed lets me feel close to her again. My daughter says I'm going crazy up here. I tell her that I've never been happier. I don't want to go back to the city and rot away in some old folks' home with a condescending nurse talking to me like I'm a child.
Yeah.
I'm 85 and I'm as sharp as I ever was. Not quite as spry, no, but if anything really needs fixing, I have a telephone and I have the internet. I can call for help if I need it. I intend to live out my days here in this house, with the woods stretching endlessly on behind me. I'll breathe fresh air, relax in solitude, and wait for the Lord to tell me that my time is done. Until then, I'll do all I can to enjoy the time I have left on my terms. Of course, that said, my daughter Sarah still worries after me more than she ought to. I suppose I should find it sweet, but really it's a little annoying. I love her dearly, and I'm glad we raised her right, yada yada. But when I'm trying to read, I don't need her knocking on my door to fuss over me. I'm sitting in my chair on the porch. I have coffee and a sandwich. I'm not going anywhere. And even if I was, I'm hardly feeble. Regardless, she insists that I need the company. I gave up fighting her on that. I figure she's doing it more for her own peace of mind than anything else. I was never there for my father in his twilight years. He and I weren't on speaking terms, and after he passed, well, I suppose I'd wished one of us had had the balls to say one last nice thing.
Yeah.
And I suppose I wish that it had been me. Besides, sometimes she brings me gifts. Not quite as fancy as the ones Charlie sometimes brings, but fancy in their own way. Cameras to monitor the outside so I can see who's coming from my tablet computer, and I suppose the tablet computer herself. I've adapted well enough to it all, I suppose. I'd like to think I've done so better than most my age, and
Yeah,
if I'm being honest,
Sure.
I like how easy the technology has made some things, even if they were the things I didn't really ask for in the first place. The other day, Sarah asked me if Charlie's long absences bothered me. I told her they didn't. Charlie has always been an outdoor cat. He's as much a creature of the forest as the birds and the squirrels. Adeline used to worry after him since there's coyotes and bears out there, but I don't. I reckon that if Charlie made it this long without running into trouble, he knows what he's doing. And judging by the things he's sometimes brought home, I got the impression he wasn't exactly in danger. It wasn't often, but every now and then when Charlie came back, he'd have some sort of trinket with him. Sometimes it was junk, bottle caps, pieces of old cans and whatnot. Sometimes he'd have coins, usually just small change. But every now and then, he'd have something a little more valuable, jewelry and whatnot. Some of it was fake. A few pieces, though, they looked pretty real. I always kept the real-looking ones in a drawer, in case anyone ever came looking for them. It didn't seem right to sell them. I figured that they'd probably been dropped somewhere in the woods by hikers, and Charlie had found them. Either that, or he was raiding some kind of garbage pile. It was hard to say for sure. Regardless, I got the vibe that he was staying out of trouble. Some cats are dumb.
85-year-old just
Charlie
used the
isn't.
word vibe.
I've got more faith in that cat than I've had in most people. Still, Sarah had her question to ask. You don't wonder where he's going at all? I got the impression that she asked more out of genuine curiosity than anything else, and that told me she was trying to work her way up towards some kind of point. What that cat does is his business, I said. And you're not in the least bit curious, huh? All right, what did you buy? The sales pitch was getting a little bit annoying, and Sarah just smiled sheepishly. Okay, well, I just thought it might be fun, you know. But they've got these cameras. People wear them when they're biking and stuff. You can attach them right to your body. Isn't that neat? I suppose. I didn't really see the point to it, but I was playing along. It might be cool. It'll give you something to look at when he gets back. Truth be told, I thought the whole idea was a little stupid. But she'd gotten my attention, I suppose. Something in my gut told me that this was the sort of question that was going to keep me up. Besides, Sarah seemed pretty interested in it, and as much as my daughter can annoy me sometimes, I've never once been able to say no to my little girl, and I wasn't about to start now that she'd hit 50.
50?
I
Sheesh.
suppose Charlie put up with those ridiculous sweaters your mother always put on him around Christmas time. He'll probably tolerate this too, and I don't imagine it'll do him any harm. It won't, trust me. This'll be fun, I promise. I could hear the years melting away in her voice, and beneath the lines of age and gray at her temples, I could see that same 2-year-old I'd not so begrudgingly sat and had imaginary tea with once upon a time. She split into a full grin and reached into her purse to take out the camera, which looked like a small gray box. She'd even bought a harness. The kids are gonna love this too. They always ask about you and Charlie, you know. Oh, I'm sure they do, I replied. The kids must have been at least pushing 20 by now. I doubt they spared much of a thought towards what I was up to. But it was nice of her to lie to me, I guess. Looking at that harness and camera, the first thing that came to mind is Charlie is not gonna be happy about this. But I kept that thought to myself. Aside from moderately annoying the poor cat a little bit, the whole idea seemed harmless enough. Besides, maybe we'd actually see something interesting when we looked back at the footage. Sarah, of course, showed me how to set everything up. She showed me how to access the video by myself, and I'd say I got the hang of it moderately quickly. I knew the steps at least, and if I got stuck, I could always call her. Then, after chatting for a while longer, she went home and let me return to my solitude. Charlie hadn't come back home yet, although he usually didn't show up until sundown, so I set everything aside and sat down to read a book, and at some point, I fell asleep in my chair. When I woke up, it was dawn, and I could see Charlie sitting on the banister of the porch, right outside the window, so I'd know he was there when I woke up. As soon as he saw me moving, he started meowing and pacing around. I picked myself up, stretched, and shuffled over to the door to let him in. He scurried indoors and went straight for the food bowl, and as he did, I noticed that he'd left me something on the deck. It gleamed brightly in the morning sun, and I slowly bent down to pick it
Oh,
up.
come on.
It was a necklace. Judging by the tarnish on it, it was real silver. The chain looked broken, but the charm looked all right. It depicted a little heart. Nothing fancy, but it was something good for a lady, I suppose. No engravings on it. No sign of who it belonged to. It was likely that nobody would come looking for this, but I still took it to the sink to wash it off before I put it in the drawer with the rest. That drawer rattled with old rings, necklaces, earrings, and rare coins that Charlie had brought over the years. The old cat himself was going to town on his dry food bowl as if he'd never seen food before in his life. I honestly felt a little bad for him, and I hoped he hadn't been waiting too long. I went to fetch some wet food for him, partially as an apology, and partially because I knew he'd start to get mouthy with me if I didn't give him a proper breakfast. I was too tired to listen to that old man bitch. Charlie's a good cat, despite his attitude. He's a graying Maine Coon with a mean face, although he always melted like butter in Adeline's hands. She was always inclined to baby him, but I always saw him as a fellow curmudgeon to pass the days with. I've never actually told anyone this, but I always imagined he'd have a bit of a southern drawl if he could talk, and that he'd sound a little bit like John Wayne. As soon as he heard me opening the wet food, he went right at my ankles expectantly, meowing and demanding his breakfast. I figured it wasn't wise to keep him waiting. I set the bowl down on the kitchen table and let him jump up to eat his fill while I started on my own breakfast. Charlie had a nap while I ate, sleeping in the armchair Adeline had once liked to sit in. I didn't bother him until around noon, when I remembered that camera that Sarah had bought. I'd left it in the living room, and while I hadn't put too much thought into putting it on Charlie, the memory of the necklace I'd found that morning had gotten me thinking, where was my old friend getting all that junk? Was he finding it? Stealing it? What? I suppose the camera was likely to answer that. Sarah had already piqued my curiosity as to where he went, but that posed a question that required a more immediate answer. Charlie was out cold, with that contented look cats have when they sleep, and he paid me no mind as I got up to fetch the camera. I read over the instructions again and played with it for a bit before I actually tried to set it up. I recorded a little snippet of footage of Charlie napping there on the couch and popped that into my computer to review. The quality of the camera seemed fairly nice. It was easy enough to access the files. Might as well go and make sure the harness fit. Charlie only gave some slight protest when I bothered him to put the harness on. I'd committed the sin of awakening him, although he gave me a pass despite clearly being grumpy. "Sorry, old-timer," I said, before scratching him under the chin. I fastened the harness around him, then fitted the camera onto the chest. "Guess I'll be along for your next adventure, huh?" He just chirped at me and sniffed my fingers, then flopped back down to continue his rest. He didn't stay that way for long. Within the next 10 minutes or so, he was at the back door stretching and pacing, ready to set out on the road again. I checked to make sure his camera was on before setting him loose. "Happy trails, Pilgrim."
Not
I said under
Pilgrim.
my breath as he scampered outside and bounded down the stairs. He stopped to look at me briefly before he took off into the forest, and I knew I probably wouldn't see him again until nightfall. Normally, I'd have been in bed by 9, considering I was up so early. But thinking about Charlie and what I'd find on his camera kept me up, and I couldn't help but feel the house was a little too quiet for a change. I put the TV on to try and distract myself, since reading hadn't quite done the trick. I poured myself a hard drink as well.
Ooh,
No harm in that, I figured.
yes.
It'd been a while since I'd indulged, not since Adeline's funeral. We'd buried an empty casket.
Right.
There hadn't been a body.
So just
After 2 months of
a
looking,
basket.
there wasn't too much point in pretending as if she was ever coming back. My mind stayed sharp over the years. Adeline wasn't quite as lucky. Dementia ran in her family. We'd seen it happen to her mother. A slow, cruel decline. We'd both feared for years that it would happen to her too. Then, when we started seeing the signs, neither of us acknowledged it, even when they became too large to ignore. Sarah was over constantly back then, doing what she could to help us out. Adeline was a strong-willed woman up until the end, though. Sarah suggested retirement homes, but neither of us wanted to go. She wasn't feeble. She and I had taken care of ourselves. We'd kept our health into our old age. We even went on walks through the trails out behind the house. Going into some home where they'd infantilize her, treat her as if she was less of a person just because she was old and sick. Take her out of the home she'd known for years. I couldn't do that to her. I didn't want to watch her go through that, and I would have been damned if I let her go without me. No, she was my wife, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. Those were the vows, and I would honor them until death. Death. When I was a young man, in my 20s and looking to propose, the prospect of growing old together terrified me. I wouldn't give back the memories we made together, not for anything. But back then, the idea of one day losing her, or of knowing the pain she might feel if she lost me, that thought would sometimes creep into the back of my mind. I'd always banish it, dismissing it as something to worry about in the future. Then, when one morning I woke up to find the spot in the bed beside me empty, when I never saw her again, then I had to accept that eventually had come. The police suggested that she'd gone on a hike alone. She'd done that before when we were younger. I didn't argue with them. I imagine that's just what she did. She woke up, forgetting the years that had passed, looking out into the crisp morning air, and decided to enjoy it. She walked out, and she never came back in. Maybe she'd forgotten the trail, got turned around, and wandered deeper into the woods. Maybe she'd fallen, hurt herself, and never been found. Whatever ending had befallen her, I preferred not to think about it. It was better that I didn't know, even if not knowing was the cruelest thing in the world. Sarah was there for me, of course. I suppose it's why she doted on me so much in the year or so since. I wonder if deep down she fears that one day I'll follow Adeline into those woods, and she'll never see me again either. The scotch sat in my hands as I stared blankly at the TV, not really watching the infomercial on the screen. A flash of movement from the corner of my eye drew my attention and tore me away from my thoughts. Charlie paced on the back porch outside. The camera harness on him looked unharmed. I set my glass down and stood up to let him in. "Hey, you have a nice adventure, old-timer?" I asked. He just went straight for his food bowl. Dinner time. I let him gorge himself on dry food while I got a tin of wet food for him. That got his attention, and he hopped up onto the kitchen table to await his feast. "You're a spoiled cat, aren't you?" I asked. I'll bet if he could have responded, he'd have said something like, "You bet your ass, Pilgrim."
Not Pilgrim.
As he ate, I took the camera off his chest and undid the harness. He seemed happy to have it off. The camera was a little bit dirtier and had stopped recording some time ago. I vaguely recalled Sarah said something about the camera not having a lot of battery.
Hi, Alice.
A couple of hours or something. I probably wouldn't have gotten the full adventure, but that was fine by me. I doubt I'd have missed anything that interesting.
How's it going?
I was tired and wanted to sleep, but the camera called to me. I can't explain the sense of urgency I felt about looking at that footage. Maybe I was more bored with my routine than I thought, and at the very least, the footage might be somewhat interesting. I gave Charlie a pat on the head before deciding a cup of
How's
tea
it going,
might give me
Alice?
the boost I needed to go through that footage. When all was said and done, Charlie had gotten comfortable in his favorite chair, and I'd retired with my hot tea to my office. I plugged the camera into my computer
Yeah, I'm
and
allergic
took a
to
sip of my
cuteness,
drink.
so you made my nose
There
go
were only a
bleh.
couple of videos stored on the camera. I
'Cause he's so
recognized a
cute.
few as the test videos I'd taken by the thumbnails. The last one, though, it must have taken its thumbnail from a random point in the video. It looked almost pitch black, as if something were obscuring the camera. I frowned at the sight of it and hoped like hell the file wasn't messed up somehow. I'd have needed to call Sarah if it was, and who knew when she could make it out to see me. I clicked the video anyway, just to see what happened. I didn't expect it to start, but it did. I could see part of Charlie's head and my own jean-clad legs as I turned the camera on. I remembered this. This was just before I'd let
Sorry I
him
was
out.
gone for so long.
Happy
It
trails.
was dinner time in chaos. Oh,
I
you
heard
ate
myself
today. That's
say
nice. I haven't
before
done
the
that
back
yet.
door opened and Charlie
Look at this
was set
picture,
loose
though.
upon the forest. What followed was some rather neat-looking footage, as Charlie skulked around some bushes and tall grass. But I can't really say it was all that interesting. He climbed some fallen branches and made his way into one of the neighbors' yards. He
I think
watched
it's
them for a
done.
little while and even ate some treats they'd left out that seemed to be for him, the little glutton. Then he walked back off into the woods. I am sure at one point I saw him pass the hiking trail that Adeline and I used to walk. I recognized a little creek that he walked along as he moved deeper into the forest. There was a familiar rustle of grass and water as he walked along, although the sound quickly became annoying, so I lowered the volume. I couldn't help but wonder just where the hell he was going out there, but I imagined he was probably just hunting. Maybe he'd kill a mouse or something. The canopy above him seemed to get a few shades darker as he climbed up onto a fallen birch tree. The loose bark crinkled under his paws. The tree seemed to lead up to another, taller tree. The canopy above was thick enough that it almost seemed like nighttime, despite it still being fairly early in the day. Looking at the timestamp of the video, he'd only been out for an hour and a bit. He'd moved along the branch of the taller tree, walking as if he knew where he was going. I could have sworn I caught a glimpse of something ahead of him. At a glance, it looked a bit like a bird's nest, although it seemed rather large.
Yeah,
That
sure. Looking
said,
good. Oh,
I knew
thanks.
some birds liked large nests. The longer I watched, the more glimpses I caught of the thing. It was definitely a nest of some sort. Twigs and leaves had been deliberately put together to form something. Although this was bigger than any bird's nest I'd seen before. It seemed to completely dominate the top of
I am
one
done.
tree, and Charlie kept climbing as if he hadn't quite reached the top yet. Hell, I couldn't even see the sides of this thing.
Alright,
It
so this
seemed
is the
less
first
like
one
a
I made.
nest and more like a wall of branches that
The
seemed
next one.
too big and too thick.
I think
for
they're about a year
regular
apart,
bird to
too.
lift. After a while, one of the branches that Charlie had climbed seemed to turn towards the nest. Getting closer, I could have sworn I saw bits of rope holding some of the larger sticks, or perhaps it would be more apt to call them branches together. I didn't get that good of a look, though. Charlie seemed to weave his way through a gap in the nest, creeping in as if he owned the place. The inside seemed pitch black. Charlie moved slowly, carefully, choosing each step as he drew closer.
Oh, snap.
It was over a minute until there was any light again,
Oops.
long enough to make me check and see if the video had ended. But there was still about a half hour left.
Why is it not?
At
Oh,
last, he seemed to emerge onto
I'm
the
on the
other
wrong
side of whatever
thingy.
wall he just passed through.
let's see.
The light inside the nest was scarce. The interior was scattered with large black feathers, and I could see the sunlight glinting off bits of shiny things. Tin cans, children's toys, pocket watches, hood ornaments, jewelry. Was this where he was getting all that? What the hell was this? Some kind of massive crow's nest? I was hardly an expert on crows, but I couldn't imagine they'd ever make a nest that large. Charlie paused, as if looking or listening for something, before he continued. He paused to sniff a few pieces of discarded junk before casually making his way over to the far side of the nest. As he walked, I noticed the shapes of things that didn't quite look like branches or sticks. They were brownish in color and seemed to blend in easily, but the shape of them was all wrong. Branches don't have those smooth edges. Branches don't curve inwards on themselves. And branches don't have eye sockets.
Hello?
I could see the skull of some sort of animal, a large rodent of some kind, staring emptily from the interwoven branches. I could see bones with smaller twigs wrapped around them, used almost as additional support for the structure of the nest. And as Charlie walked, I saw something that made my heart begin to beat faster as a sick sensation filled my stomach. I've seen human skulls on TV, but never in real life. Had it not been for the matted black hair that still clung to the scalp, I might have been able to dismiss the idea that it was anyone else. But I knew that hair. I'd kissed that head 1,000 times. Over a lifetime together.
Oh no.
I remembered the laughing eyes in those now empty sockets.
Oh no.
Even in death, I recognized my Adeline. Or what was left of my Adeline.
Oh no.
How many of her bones had been added to this nest? Her body alone couldn't have been what became its foundation. How many others had been claimed as construction materials for this nest? Oh my God. Charlie sat reverently before Adeline's skull, and I knew that he recognized her too. He'd almost certainly come there to mourn, to pay his respects, or simply to be with her. Even if she was long gone, I could only pray that whatever had done this to her had only taken her after she died. But from the gashes in the bone, I feared that wasn't the case. But what could have done something like this? What could have taken her? What could have... Charlie had been sitting quietly for almost 10 minutes as I placed my hands to my mouth, stifling my own cries of grief. And then he moved, suddenly, as if something had startled him. From the speakers, I heard a raspy sound, an inhuman hiss that sounded like a cross between a sadistic cackle and the chattering of some large bird. Charlie scurried out of sight, moving between another gap in the branches of the nest before positioning himself to look back. Through the gaps in the branches and bones, I could see something else had entered the nest, although I couldn't fully see what it was. All I could see was 2 scaled legs that each ended with a 4-toed claw, just like a bird of prey. It chittered and cackled
Birds of
as it
prey,
approached
oh
the spot where
snap.
Charlie had been, moving awkwardly as it hopped closer. I could see long black feathers trailing down from the creature's body as it continued to chitter. It seemed to inspect the spot where Charlie had been, and I heard him hiss. It didn't do much to deter the creature that was hunting for him. The creature that had likely killed my wife. I could hear the rustling of sticks, and the camera blurred as Charlie moved again to crawl out of the nest. He moved through the gaps in the branches as if he'd done this 1,000 times, and found his way onto a long branch that led down. Then he ran for freedom, and the very last shot I saw in that video was the blur of the ground beneath him. As the video ended, I couldn't help but notice Charlie in the doorway of my office. His eyes were wide and alert. His ears were early yet. I told her I'd get around to it. She can never see what I've seen. She can never know what happened to her mother. Never. But I'm not foolish enough to delete that footage. If proof is ever needed, it needs to be accessible. To Sarah, or to anyone else who may need it, should I not return from the woods today. I haven't hunted in years,
But I dusted off my old rifle from the garage. It still works fine, and I've got bullets. I don't know if I'm half the shot I used to be. It's one thing to hit a few tin cans out in the backyard. It's another to hit a moving target. But I'm sure I'll manage one way or another. I'm sure I can follow the path that Charlie took. Not exactly, but close enough. I'm sure that if I go out into the woods, I can find the nest. I can find whatever horrible thing lives there. And when I do, by God, I will kill it.
Ooh, snap.
For Adeline.
Wait, is that the end? Wait. So we don't even know what that thing was? It just ends like that? Wait, for real? Wait. Wait, for real? For real? Okay, well, guess we're just gonna listen to swing music till I'm done. I'm almost done, you guys. Sorry it's taking so long.
The cryptos creak and the tombstones quake. Happy haunts materialize.
Wow, all that build up. That's what I'm saying, bro. I was like, what do you mean you're not gonna tell us what happened?
Now don't close your eyes and don't try to hide.
For a silly spook, place it by your side.
Shrouded in a dark disguise.
They pretend to terrorize. Grim ghosts come out to socialize.
Happy haunts materialize.
Grim ghosts come out to socialize.
I'll be late to the bamboo big food. Gotta wait till the baby gets picked up. What do you mean, bro? You're not allowed to do that. No. Not approved. Not approved. Not approved. Nope. Nope. I think we're done. Yeah, we're done. Alright, guys. Well, let's see who's live on Twitch. We got M's. I don't see Pally Callie. So we're gonna rate M's from YouTube. Your ghost host. Mwahaha.
Step all the way in, please, and make room for everyone. There's no turning back now. The carriage that will carry you into the moldering sanctum of the
Oops,
spirit
I'm breaking stuff. Oh, wait. Okay.
one or two loved one. Kindly watch your step as you board. Oh yes, and no flash pictures. Please.
When the cryptos creak and the tombstones quake.
Alright.
Happy haunts materialize.
That's where we're going. It's not really a huge raid because, you know, this is YouTube, so by the time y'all see it in real life, I would have already happened. But yeah, this is where we're going. So, yeah. Hope you guys have fun. Hope you have a good day, night, and or evening, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.